is horse racing season around here, and always good to have one of the shining stars of the NBC programming on. My fellow yoga doer, and namaste to you, Donna Brothers. Welcome back to Baltimore. We have everything here but the Kentucky Derby winner. This one's going to be a strange one, huh?
Yeah, Nestor, thank you. Namaste to you and to all the listeners. It's kind of crazy because I think this is going to be the first time, well, certainly since I've been covering the Preakness, and I'm not sure historically how far you'd have to go back, where rather than us talking about the couple of new shooters that are in the race that were not in the Derby, I think literally half the field are going to be, it's going to be comprised of horses who did not run in the Kentucky Derby.
Well, there's been a movement afoot about 2 weeks not being enough time for these animals. I know you're very, very active as a rider and an animal lover and all that you do for thoroughbreds, and we'll get to that in a moment. But, if you own a horse that's of that ilk, and 2 weeks feels like something bad to do to the horse, which I've heard enough people say that, through the course of time, that, maybe there's an opening here to stretch this thing out, or maybe that's what happens. But I do remember Spend a Buck, and that was more about the bucks. That was about money and about the Triple Crown and the money, all getting, the purses being larger if you won the Triple Crown. And that happened back in 1985. But, I've been on the radio since 91 here. I've been in the media since literally 84 and 85. And it's just a weird week all the way around, and especially with the drumbeat now, the race really moving. I'm a Baltimorean. I'm a Baltimore positive guy. I love Maryland. I love Laurel. I go to Laurel. I drink at Laurel. I bet at Laurel. I was at Laurel a couple of weeks ago. No one in Baltimore wants to see us lose this race, and I know you guys in the broadcast are going to be showing a grandstand that is basically condemned, Donna. You know what I mean? Literally, we're running running a race at part of the track that's been condemned.
Well, luckily they have all those big tents in the infield, Nestor. So, I guess that we're going to have a lot of temporary housing in the infield. But, it's a crazy situation up there, and it's easy to see how both sides make a strong and compelling case. And when I say both sides, I mean the city of Baltimore and the Stronach Group. And I'm just glad that they have to fight it out and work it out, and we don't.
Yeah, you get to leave town on Monday. I get to sit here and, you watch the lefts and the rights and all that. For the industry and for what happened at the Derby, I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm watching the Derby. And I text my wife, who's down in Florida taking care of her ailing mom, and said, glad we sat this one out, and watch you out there getting wet and everybody else. And usually we're, dressed in there for the party and whatnot. But when I do watch, I love the whole presentation. I watch you guys all week, and I start on Friday with the Oaks and go through it to learn the connections, and it makes me feel a little bit more like I'm there. I watched you out on the, at the end doing the interview. The 22 minutes for you being out there in the middle of the track, having already conducted the winning interview, it stood as surreal for me from where I was, and I'm having fun with it and tweeting that I think Roger Goodell should settle this, and funny little things that I'm doing out on Twitter. But for the industry and for the sanctity of everybody who held a ticket and everybody has a stake in the race, it has been a bizarre aftermath to all of this as to what a guy like me that barely knows what an inquiry, what a steward would be looking for, literally, to getting an outcome that was, I think, shocking to a lot of people.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought it up. I'd like to clear up a few misconceptions. So, you cover a lot of sports. I was a jockey. My mother was a jockey. I'm steeped in horse racing since my earliest memory. And so for me, about 5 minutes into the inquiry, maybe about 8 minutes in, when I realized, wow, it's taken a long time. And I had already seen the replay by then several times. I was already back. I was even off my horse by then. And I immediately had the awareness that number is coming down, and the stewards are just trying to decide how many horses he bothered and where those horses finished.
Wow.
Because they have to place the horse that interfered, the offending horse, they have to place that offending horse behind the offended. And so in this case, he bothered 3 other horses pretty egregiously. And so then they had to figure out where those 3 other horses ran. Now, simultaneously, I've read from the stewards, before the first claim of foul came in from Flavia Pratt, they were already trying to decide which horses they call a special on, which means the winner is always tested for any sort of, drugs or any sort of something not supposed to be in their system. So they go back to the detention barn. But they also will pull a special on 2 or 3 other horses in the race. So they were already trying to decide who to call a special on. They hadn't even gotten through that process yet. They get the claim of foul from Flavia Pratt. They start watching that. And then, of course, another claim of foul comes in from John Court. They start watching that. And so I think not immediately, but fairly soon into the process, they knew they had to take the winner down. They just didn't know where to put him because they had to figure out who all he bothered and who did he bother badly enough that we have to place him behind that horse. And then let's move on to this fact that the jockey's gotten a suspension. So when you first watch it as a racing insider, you go, well, I don't think he's going to get a suspension because his horse obviously ducked out unpredictably and he straightened the horse out fairly quickly. However, in the aftermath of it, probably on the advice of his attorneys, he kept saying, I didn't endanger anyone. And so it's up to the stewards to decide, does this jockey realize that his horse bothered other people, other horses, potentially could have been a dangerous situation, or does he not have a clear understanding of that? And Luis Saez probably has a clear understanding of that, but probably on the advice of his attorneys had to keep saying, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't bother anybody. But his horse clearly did something wrong and clearly did interfere with some other horses, and it could have been a potentially dangerous situation. And I think this is why he's also gotten a suspension.
Donna, can I ask you, when you were there doing the interview right at the end and the rain and the hubbub and all that, you just said to me pretty egregiously, and I guess in the aftermath of slowing down, did you realize at that moment something could have been amiss, or was it business as usual and normal, or did anybody hit you in the ear to say, go slow here, there's going to be something? I mean, at what point did you realize it literally? Did you go away? And then, I'm trying to get the sequence of events, because I would think for you, this was really an incredible thing that happened in those 5 minutes when you were out there interviewing him, because his interview was joyous, right? In that moment, if they do anything wrong in the Kentucky Derby, there's a million eyes watching. Somebody would know it. Now that we look back, you say egregious, but I don't know that if you believe that when you saw it, or whether you even see the race very well from where you are.
I don't see the race at all. That's how well I see the race. So I'm on a horse. I'm standing behind the starting gate for the horses for the Kentucky Derby. When they spring the latch, I take off the wrong way of the racetrack. So they're headed around the racetrack in one direction. I'm headed in the other direction. I'm on the outside fence. And so I stop when they near me. I let them pass as I stand still with 2 other outriders on the track. And then we take off once they've passed, and I meet the winner on the backside. So all I get is the call of the race. Wow. And Larry Colmus wasn't able to see that from his point of view, and so he didn't call that. What I did get from the call of the race, from the call of the race, is that at some point Maximum Security had lost momentum, because he sounded like he was clearly in front, and then he was being passed, and then he was back in front again. And so now, another thing that I should say is that if there had been a claim of foul lodged against the winner before I were to interview Luis Saez, I would not have been allowed to interview him, because I would have been detaining a witness, right? Luis Saez would have to get back and get on the phone to the stewards. So before I interviewed Luis Saez, there had been no claim of foul yet. That didn't happen until either the moment during the interview or right after, but it didn't happen before. I wouldn't have been able to talk to him. And so when I did talk to Saez, he did mention that my horse spooked from the crowd noise. He's a very young horse, but because I had no inkling, nobody had told me that spooked meant ducked out, I thought he was saying that he spooked and lost momentum, slowed down. And so I addressed it in that way and just said, the crowd noise can be deafening as you turn for home. Do you feel like that's what scared him? And he said, yeah, I don't know. He's a young horse and he spooked. And then we just moved on. But at that point, I had no idea that he had moved out from the 1 path to the 5 path in a split second, and I had no idea that there was going to be a claim of foul.
Donna Brothers is here. We're talking all things horse racing as we get ready for the Preakness here this week and out in the wet and all that. I would say this for someone like me, it being a football fan, you've been through the refereeing and the pass interference and all of that, and who is the ultimate arbitrator of all of that, and certainly even things off the field when it comes to the NFL, and I covered that. I had one of your cohorts on earlier this week that also spends his time with the NFL. But, the Stewarts have a tough job in any of these cases, and as you've pointed out, you literally have a live witness there. They don't pull the players up in a football game and said, who went up first and who touched who and what do you think? But in this case, the jockeys talk, the horses don't. The whole process of it, and I've been at the track, hundreds of times when inquiries have gone up, and you sit wherever you are in the bar or in the track or at home, and you watch it, and you make your own little call, and they put the thing up, and it's $20 one way or the other, and you move on. In the Kentucky Derby, it's a little different, right? And for the stewards and to learn for a layman like myself, who's bet plenty of $2 and $5 and $10 and $20 tickets, as to how it actually works. And all of the pieces of it over those 20 minutes, it has certainly been educational. And maybe a way the industry doesn't want all of us to know on something of this kind of magnitude, but everybody became a referee in the aftermath of the NFC Championship game with football, and I think everybody wants to become a part-time horse racing steward and look at this, because I don't think any of us really have read the rule books. It's kind of like professional wrestling. We know there's a rule book, we just haven't read it to really know exactly what they're looking for. And there's a lot of nuance in this, right?
Well, I heard a guy on television say the other day that he prefaced by saying, I don't burden myself with a tremendous amount of knowledge about horse racing, but I think the stewards made the wrong decision. That's just a complete joke to me. First of all, I admit I don't know anything about horse racing. And secondly, I'm going to judge what the stewards did. And so I feel like the stewards 100% made the right decision. One of the things that we do in this sport that you pointed out that no other sport does is that the stewards they do talk to the jockey in advance. And I really honestly don't think we need to do that anymore. I think it's an outdated modem, because there was a time when we didn't have so many great camera angles. And a lot of times it was he said, when one of the jockeys would come back, get the stewards on the phone, the stewards would watch a blurry view of the race. Well, now they've got so many angles that I really don't think they need to get the jockeys on the phone. It's clear from watching the race what happened. And I think in this case, it was pretty clear once they saw it. Now, having said that, maybe it did need to be pointed out to them. I'm not sure they had seen it yet, but again, when you watch it, it's because it was a funny angle. You don't immediately notice it on the main pan shot, which is the main view. You've got to get to one of the other angles before you even notice it.
You got up on these animals for a long time and did this for a living, and the danger part of it, when a back leg and a front leg get between each other, when you see that in HD and, real speed and know the human beings and the animals that are involved, you've been involved in those things and spills and stuff like that. When you go back and look at it, you said pretty egregiously, right? I guess a little clarity for someone who's been on a horse is a little bit different. And I always defer to folks like you that understand and know this. You have no second guess at all on this. And in the aftermath, 30 minutes later, when tickets were going everywhere, you're very good with this outcome, correct?
I have absolutely no second guesses about it at all. If this were to happen on a Wednesday or Thursday, any other day of the week, any other smaller race on the undercard, that number comes down. Obviously, it became a much bigger deal because it was one of the Kentucky Derby, and in 145 years of the history, no horse has ever been taken down because of interference in the race from the win position. So obviously, there's going to be a lot of second guessing on it and all of that, but absolutely, I think they made the right decision, and I stand by the decision that they made.
For you and the Preakness and coming in here, it's a different kind of field, right? And, Baffert had the favorite and certainly did not get a good trip 2 weeks ago. Baffert has an incredible, 7 times doing this here. He loves him some crab cakes. Some thoughts about this race and how it does shape up, because it is atypical of what we see in Preaknesses with the Derby winner and sort of that pomp and circumstance to be watching and waiting and hoping that we move on to the Belmont and, we all pack it up and take it up there for another chance. That's sort of out of the question, but all that being said, it's a pretty good race.
Yeah, it's absolutely a good race. And that's one of the things that, Nestor, it's going to get lost in this story because people are going to say, oh, the luster's off of it because we don't have the Derby 1-2 finishers in there. Or 1-2-3 finishers, actually. And I totally disagree. This is still a really good race. And in fact, why don't we talk about your home team? Because there's going to be plenty of home team connections. And one of them is a horse called Always Mining, trained by Kelly Rubley. She has done a phenomenal job with this horse. This is a horse that when her owners purchased this horse privately last summer, at that point he had won one race in his life from 6 starts. He's now won 6 races in a row, and the last one was the Federico Tessio, which, as you know, is sort of a win-in-your-end race for the Preakness Stakes, and he won that Federico Tessio by 11.5 lengths. So he's probably going to be the strongest Federico Tessio contender that's run in the Preakness Stakes, at least in the last 20 years that I've been covering it. And so you've got a lot of great local stories for the Preakness this year. But yes, you're right, Baffert brings in Improbable. I beg to differ. I don't think he really had a bad trip in the Kentucky Derby. I just don't think he wanted to go 1.25 miles, but I think the 1 3/16 will suit him a lot better.
We will see you here around town for all the Preakness festivities, and I hope we get beautiful weather and a nice crowd, and I hope we're coming back to Old Hilltop for a long, long time into the future. Great to visit with you. Thanks for making time. Namaste to you.
All right. Good to talk to you, Nestor. Namaste.
Donna Barton Brothers joining us here from NBC Sports and their Triple Crown coverage. You can find them on Saturday, on Friday, Black Eyed Susan, around town, all the coverage coming here, including Bob Baffert. You have heard a bunch of stuff on AM 1570 this week, including Charlie Eckerman and Clem Florio and Joe DeFrancis and our former governor Bob Ehrlich, all in long form, sometimes 20 years ago, talking about saving this race for our community. You know of my Baltimore Positive movement? I'll be talking more about that all week long. You can find me out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and streaming live right here on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube, WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.